Welcome to Ask Joe number 199, the Fool's Gold edition. Here's a song that you can mix yourself. Details to follow.
Come a little closer here. No need to try and hide nor fear. Your lips may lie, but I know your soul tells every truth it holds. Come in all of your ruin. You've carried enough from all that it has been. Cease the need to be a prideful king or queen, having control, looking for the fool's gold. Wandered off, lost and gone astray, tried to find a way to go, but oh, just come home.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Ask Joe. This is number 199. I need some ideas for episode 200. If I don't hear a really great idea, I may just do the same thing I always do, which is fine with me. But if you would like something different, I'm open to ideas. I love to come up with ideas, but it's your turn. You come up with an idea. Let's see what happens, okay? So leave a comment below. If you're watching the video or listening to the podcast, head over to the website or to YouTube and let us know what you want to see for episode 200. Yeah. So what is that song you just heard? That is a song called Fool's Gold by a band called Sunday Muse. And what's cool about this song is it is a song I'm featuring in season 2 of Mixed Together, which we just finished Mixed Together season 1, and 2 days later I launched season 2. So what is Mixed Together? If you've been under a rock or just discovered Home Studio Corner, it's where I mix a song start to finish and you can mix along with me. All the videos are available for free on YouTube. And if you want to download the tracks, all you have to do is submit your email address, sign up to my newsletter, and I give you the tracks to download for both songs. So if you want to download this song, which is a really cool, chill acoustic tune, or if you want to do the song Mission, which is one of my songs, which is a bigger, just guilty pleasure rock song, you can do both over at homestudiocorner.com/MT for Mix Together. All right. I thought I had something else to say, but I don't. So I hope you're doing well. If you didn't know, you can actually join these podcasts every week. I stream them live on YouTube. Go to homestudiocorner.com/calendar. You can subscribe to the calendar, and then your phone will tell you when I'm going live and give you a link, and you can join, just like all these lovely people here that I can see with their chats, their little comments filling up the chat. It makes me super happy, and I'm glad you're here. We got classics here like Lakshay and Steve Ross-Botham, and Johnny Lipsham made an appearance. Ben Holmes is here. Keith Sparks, Laura Wallace, Tim E. Lots of good folks that show up every week, and I'd like you to be one of them. So come hang out with us. Only other thing is I will just say I'm not going to give any more details than this, and we're going to get into your questions. So those of you here, start thinking up some questions. I'm ready to answer as many of those as I can get to before my voice goes out. So get ready. Coming in a few days, I'll be adding something new to Home Studio Corner, new content-wise, new video series, and that's all I'm going to tell you. It's going to be different and hopefully something that'll bring a lot of value to you, and I'm excited to show you. Kind of filling in what I think are some gaps in the way I've been doing Home Studio Corner, and in certain types of content or types of situations that I've not documented well and created content around. So all that to say, just be sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, homestudiocorner.com, or youtube.com/homestudiocorner, and you will see that when it comes out. And yes, I am a tease. Boom. Alrighty, it's time for your questions. These Q&A sections are really great because it really helps specific questions that you have versus me just talking on and on about theoretical stuff. I like getting down and dirty with real stuff that you're dealing with in your actual real life home studio music world. So bring your questions. You can always ask them on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Joe Gilder Music, and you can follow me there. I always do a post on Tuesday mornings, and you can ask your questions there if you can't make it live. In the future, the source of the questions may change as I make some big changes to how I handle like internal stuff at Home Studio Corner. If you're a customer, you'll get a few more perks in the question asking department. But that's kind of longer term, 6 months out. So in the meantime, ask your questions there on Facebook, or better yet, come live and ask your questions, and that would be dope. Here's a question from Ian DeShong. Says, can you explain your workflow after having mixed the first song of an album? Do you save presets and bring them into each new song session, or do you mix multiple songs in one session and then break them out later for individual needs? I do not do the second one. I understand why you would maybe want to bring all the tracks into one session and have a really long, hour-long session with 10 songs in it. It just gets way too complicated. You may want the vocal to be louder on one song than the other, and any volume changes you do to the second song will have to be done via automation, actually writing in the different volumes, and that's just no way to mix. I would want to punch myself in the face after about 10 minutes of that. So no, I would keep them all in their own sessions. And that said, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but if you did the first song, so you had all the songs lined up in your session, and you mixed the first one, and then you went on to mix the second one, and you just did a save as, so you save the session as that. That's interesting to me, because then all your drum settings are already there. You don't have to import settings. You don't have to import tracks. You don't have to save a template. It's literally right there, and you can just, when you start mix number 2, you can just go in and delete any and all automation that's there and kind of start from scratch with fader levels and things, and be able to move them without having to do the automation thing I was just talking about. That is really interesting to me. It seems like it would still get pretty confusing, and I imagine having all those files loaded up into a session, you gotta pay for that somewhere, I would think. If nothing else, it would take up a lot of RAM just to have it ready and available. Maybe not RAM, but I imagine it would slow things down on some level. But that's interesting to me. But the question was, how do I handle it? So for me, I mix the first song, and I really give it a lot of attention. So I try to make it, if I'm doing an album or an EP, and if it's one where I haven't recorded it, they've just sent me files to mix, what I'll do is I will have them hopefully give me their favorite song and mix that one first, and really spend a lot of time with it and make sure I get it right, and then make a template of that session. So create a template from that session. So when I do song number 2, I use the template system in Studio One, which most systems have that now, and I create a new session based on that template. So when I start the next song, it's basically I go in and delete all the audio from that template, and then I'm able to import the tracks into that existing session that I just created from the template, and all the settings are there. Now, you could just save the settings as like channel strip settings and bring them in one by one. That to me seems tedious. I would rather just save a whole template and then import the files into that template. That said, I'm kind of answering in several questions you didn't actually ask, but when I was mixing Frankie Barranco's EP, for example, I recorded everything and kind of mixed it along the way. So when it came time to sit down and actually do the mix, I literally just pulled up the session, and the first session I wanted to mixed it, and just from what was already there. And then I kind of did the same thing on the next song, but if there was something I wrestled with a lot, for example, her vocal, trying to get it just right, and I found a set of plugins that seemed to do that well, I saved that as a channel strip called Frankie Vocal. And then in the next song, I just, whatever processing I had there before as a placeholder, got rid of that, replaced it with the that preset or that channel strip I had just made, and then I was much closer to where I wanted to be. I probably would still tweak a little bit, but that was an approach that I took as well. So I usually, depending if I'm just mixing or if I'm producing, it'll be a different approach, but it's probably a hybrid of all of those. Follow-up question from Ian. He said, I recently got 2 different sessions mastered from a respectable professional and feel they killed my mixes and squashed all my drums and vocals. Is there anything you can do to your mix to prevent this from happening? I've heard this is a common complaint in the forums. Thanks, Joe. Well, first of all, Ian, that makes me really sad. There could be a number of things. It could be that your mix was too dynamic. I know that sounds crazy. And so when he got it into a normal range, that it didn't. You could have, maybe your drums could have benefited from a little more compression on the mixing phase, so that when he did his mastering thing, it didn't take him too far. There's really no way to prevent it, though, to be honest with you. One thing you can do is get in the habit of um, running your mixes through a limiter when you're done with them, to go listen, so roughly what a heavy limiter is going to do to it, and you can hear some of those things. But sadly, and I wouldn't consider myself a great mastering engineer. I'm good. I wouldn't say I'm one of the really greats, because I just haven't done as much of that as I have done of writing and recording and mixing. But for me, thankfully, I learned a lot from Ian Shepherd, and he's big on maintaining that dynamic range and not killing things. So for me, it started off as using some more tools and metering to make sure that I'm measuring at a dynamic range that's acceptable. Kind of given, eight, a dynamic range of 8 is pretty good for like rock music. But then it got to the point where when I push it past that and get to a dynamic range of 6 or 5, it really doesn't sound as good to me. It really does sound like the drums disappeared and then got weak. It sounds like the vocal feels weird, like a lot of those things that you're talking about. So, if you can have them back it down as the mastering engineer, or hire somebody else, or see if they have a refund policy. I heard CD Baby does mastering and they have a full refund thing. That's interesting to me. But anyway, I don't know, as far as your question of how to prevent that from happening in the future, don't use that mastering engineer, might probably be the best piece of advice. And again, I'm not bashing the guy. I don't know all the circumstances, but chances are he's a loud kind of guy and did that to your song, which sounds like it must not have been the best approach for that specific song. Here's a question over in the chat from Keith Sparks. He says, how long did it take you to get a mix you were proud of? I know you probably didn't have access to the courses, sites, and tutorials we have. How long did it take you to get a mix you were proud of? So here's the interesting thing, Keith. I've been, I feel like I mentioned this recently. So if you go to look me up, Joe Gilder on iTunes or Spotify, you'll see, just with the release of my last EP, I finally, because I'm a lazy guy, finally got all my music up there in the right places. I think it's duplicated in some spots, so don't worry about that. But you can go back and listen to my album Out of Indiana that came out in 2010. Am I happy with those mixes now if I listen to them? I can hear lots of problems, but at the same time, I am still proud of them. And at the time when I did them, I was proud of them, because that was kind of the best mix I could do given the situation I was in. That's why I encourage you guys so much to release music, because you're just releasing a snapshot of where you are right now. Your music won't improve until you do, and as you over time get better and better, your music will get better and better. And it's cool to be releasing music all along the way, so that you can kind of see and document, okay, that's how good I was in 2010. Okay, that's how good I was in 2015. Look at all the different ways it's improved. So I feel like everything I've released as a musician, that's probably the biggest place I can speak to. I have been proud of, because I was releasing it with my name on it. So I had to get it to a point where I was proud before I would release it. That said, I've gotten better as an engineer and as a musician and as a producer, to where my ears are better and I hear things now that I didn't hear 8 years ago, right? I hear things differently, let's say. It's not I'm hearing things I didn't hear, but I'm not hearing in the same way that I did. I've developed my ears over the years. I'm just full of rhymes today. I developed my ears over the years and got to a point where I hear things that I maybe didn't hear as well before. And so that's an ongoing, continual process. So as far as how long did it take me to get a mix I was proud of, I don't know if you mean I'm mixing this one song and it took me 10 hours, or if you mean like how long was I in the recording process. But I mean, even in high school, when I was cranking out legitimately, quantifiably bad music, the songs weren't great, performances weren't great, the microphone was a little stick mic. Nothing about it was technically good, but I'm even proud of those, because that was the best I could do at the time. And so that's kind of a non-answer to your probably more specific question, but that's what popped in my head, and I got to go with it. William Harper says, I bought your 1-hour challenge and lost the hard drive where I stored it. How do I get it back? William, man, 1 hour challenges was a course I did 6, 7 years ago. I have I can give you all the links. I don't have it in my members area because it's not something I sell anymore. But shoot me an email, joe@homestudiocorner.com. I will send you all the links. You can re-download all that. Man, I did some weird stuff in that project. Good times. No, it was about 6 years ago, maybe 7. Anyway, will Mixed Together be an ongoing series on the channel? Good question. I don't know. I can't imagine not continuing to do it. I don't think they'll be as consecutive as they were. So season 1 finished on a Monday and season 2 started on Wednesday. I don't think it'll be like that, but it might be. But I imagine I'll continue to do them. Maybe in a few months, do another season of Mixed Together. But it's really fun to do, especially if it's client projects and they're cool with it going on YouTube and getting their tracks out there, and I can create the content while I'm mixing. That's a big thing I've been thinking about lately. I don't know exactly how this applies to anything else but what I'm talking about. But just think about it and think. Just expand your mind a little bit and think just a little bit about how can. This is something I should have ranted about earlier in my, what did we call it? My monologue. But expand your mind a little bit and think about how this could apply to you. So something I'm really into lately is multiplying my effort. Now, you may think I'm going to be all Tim Ferriss, Graham Cochran, and talk about efficiencies and all that. That's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when I do something, especially something that I enjoy, something that I'm good at, or even something I'm being paid to do, I like to think, how can I maximize what I'm doing here? In other words, how can I use this in more than one situation? How can I multiply the benefits of doing this thing? So for example, Mixed Together is one of those. The band hired me to mix the song. They actually pitched the idea, said, hey, do you want to use it for a Mixed Together series? And I thought, absolutely I do. Because then they're paying me once to mix the song. But while I'm mixing the song, which is their job, I'm actually creating content that a lot of you are now consuming, and that's building up. That's valuable to me from a running my business standpoint, and could lead to me getting more mixes or getting more customers for my courses and things like that. But it was one thing. I was hired to mix one song, and now it's turned into two things. I got to mix a song, got paid for that, and then maybe 6 months from now, I'll get a client who watched that series and wants to hire me to do something. So I'm getting two things out of it. So I don't know, I'm not saying it's not all about money necessarily, but how can you extract and multiply more value out of the stuff you're currently doing so that it's not just you doing one thing, it's maybe you doing two things. So like if I need to restring my acoustic guitar for a session on Friday, what if I did a video on how to restring your guitar while I was restringing it? That's interesting to me. I probably won't do it. Maybe I will. Or if I have to write songs, like recently I have to write songs for my EP, instead of just writing them and then releasing them, I made a video of writing them, which was weird and different and a little, vulnerable. And some people really liked it. So it seems like all my examples are make a video, but in other ways of what if you've got someone who's asking you to help them learn how to record, and you've got a session coming up, you can invite them to that session. So you're doing the work for the session, but maybe you're also helping this person get better at recording, and they're looking over your shoulder. Maybe they're even paying you as a consultant kind of thing. That's interesting to me. Or if you're mowing the grass, listen to this podcast so you're getting better at audio and how you think about audio and getting more experience in that way while you're also getting the value of a yard that's cut. So anyway, multiplying value is something I'm really into. I don't like to do something as much as I can help it that only has one outcome or one benefit. Does that make sense? If I can use it in multiple situations, that's great. For example, if I worked at a steel mill or a wood, what's it called? A place where they take trees and turn them into planks. They have a lot of shavings and clippings and wood chips that are like their byproducts of what they're making. A lot of those companies like that have these big, massive byproducts will then sell those to other businesses. So they're getting a little bit of extra revenue from something that otherwise is essentially waste. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. How can you get more waste? Take your waste and make it more valuable. Lumberyard. Thank you, Daniel. I am not good. Clearly, I've never set foot in a lumberyard. I don't have what it takes. Here's a question from Lewis Morehouse. Do you know of any decent music production software available on the iPad? I'm currently using GarageBand, but would like to upgrade. I don't know of any specifically, Lewis, and I should. I've got an iPad that's like 4 or 5 years old, so it couldn't handle it, and my kids are the only ones who use it anymore. But I know they're there, and I know they're out there. So honestly, doing a Google search YouTube. I bet a lot of people have talked about those, or even just putzing around the App Store. The reviews on there are pretty helpful. Gary Fox here is saying Arturia has a good one. I've heard of them. I like them as a company. They're kind of cool, so that's worth checking out. I've done some things in GarageBand on my phone, but that's all I've ever really explored. I know there's one that's supposed to emulate like a 4-track cassette recorder, which that to me is interesting. So you're bringing in a limitation because chances are if you're just using it for like a production tool, then it's not going to have the as good a quality as like you would have in your studio. But if you're doing it like a 4-track recorder, which wouldn't have great quality anyway. Oh, it's not Arturia, it's Aria, Auria. I don't know them as a company. Arturia is cool. Aria, I hear that app is cool as well for the iPad. So check that out. Thanks, Gary. You're making me throw out misinformation all over the internet. I'm going to get sued. Someone's going to show up in a suit and serve me with papers. I'm very interested in things today. What do you mean, interested in things? Will Paxton, what's up, my friend? Congratulations on the baby and the EP. One of those is probably bigger, more important than the others, but both are equally worth a fist bump. He says, just checking in. As you know, we just had our first baby. I know you have 3. What advice do you have for new parents on the music side of things? Yikes. Right now with a newborn, just stay alive. Don't have any grand expectations of releasing another EP soon. But pretty soon you'll get in a groove and you'll know when the baby sleeps and when you can work on music. For us, obviously, I was running Home Studio Corner when all 3 of our kids were born, and we just made it a point to have the studio on the opposite end of the house of the kids, which sometimes made it more, like the studio was in what was technically the master bedroom because that was away from the children, and that just made sense. You can tell I have an awesome wife. But yeah, and then just finding moments. You're probably going to have less big blocks of time to work on music. And I mentioned this in a live stream yesterday. There's a guy on Twitter who was telling me he really needs 3 to 4 days of 16-hour blocks to really get anything done. And I kind of called him on it and said, no, you don't. It's nice to have blocks of time. If you can spend all day on something, you'll get a lot done usually. But that's not the only way to get things done. And a lot of what we do in the studio only requires it's little 10-minute things, 20-minute things, hour-long things that we need to do. The initial tracking session for drums, sure, we need a half day, full day to do that. But then all the little things like record that one guitar for that one part, you could jump in and just do a couple of them, one evening before, while the baby's up, you go knock out a couple guitar parts, and by the time she's ready to go down, I think it's a girl, right? Then you're finished with that part. Those are the kind of things, the ways I would try to hack your time. To be able to keep making progress and keep momentum going, especially when you've released something. A lot of people will release a piece of music and then they will just chill out for like 2 years and then decide that maybe it's time to start thinking about releasing music. When I think when you release something, that's the best time. You've got momentum, you're excited, people are listening and telling you how great it is, or maybe they're telling you how awful it is, and that's a different kind of motivation. But you've got some momentum, keep it up and keep moving forward. It's kind of like in business, if you're in sales and you make a big sale, the temptation is to be like, sweet, let's go grab some beers and celebrate and just blow off the rest of the day. But like the most successful salespeople are like on the phone, thank you for your business. Thank you for wiring the $100,000 over. Your order will be shipped soon. Have a nice day. Then they pick up the phone and they're calling the next customer to make the next deal. So there's just a different mindset of you need to celebrate the wins, right? Be happy with that EP you release, for example, Will, but also what's next? And I don't mean that in like the, when I played football in high school and you have a big win on Friday night and the team gathers around, the coach is like, now it's time to look at next week. And like, it's like, come on, coach, be happy for like a second that we won instead of just being like, now you guys got to focus because next week is blah, 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 blah. We're playing Canton Academy and it kills the moment, right? So you want to savor the moment, but you also want to always be moving towards something because otherwise you're stagnant, and stagnant sucks. Sam Kanak is here. What's up, my friend? I always like it when you show up buddy. Okay, let me scroll up for questions. We're a little light on the questions this week, folks, so you need to... there's some. I found some. Gary Keenan from Scotland says, how do I know if I'm over EQing my mix? Well, if you're in Scotland, it's different than in the United States. I'm kidding. How do I know if I'm over EQing my mix? Couple ways to tell. If, first of all, you can do... I don't like giving much advice that involves making audio and musical decisions based on what you see with your eyes. But here's one. If you look and you've got one of the types of EQs that draws the EQ curve on the plugin, if you see some crazy lines, there's a good chance you're overdoing it with EQ. If it goes way up here and way down here and there's squiggles and all over the place and it's not more of a smooth looking EQ, you might be doing it wrong. Now, that's not always the case, but I find if I've got 6 different EQ moves on a vocal, I've probably missed the mark at some point, and I'll just zero everything out and start over. And usually, 98 times out of 100, it's the EQ option that has less boosts and cuts that ends up being the winner than the one that had lots of them. Another way to know if you're over EQing, a big thing is if you're not really doing a static mix, if you're not in the habit of pulling in the tracks and just moving the faders and the panning to get it to sound great, if you don't do that first, then yeah, you're probably going to be over EQing your mix, because things like the bass guitar, if it's not at the right level, then you're going to try to EQ it to get it to the right level when you should have just turned it up or turned it down. Now, if you multiply that times 40 tracks in your session, you can see how if the balance isn't right level-wise, then you're going to be doing all sorts of things with EQ or compression or other effects to try to compensate for the fact that you didn't set the levels well to begin with. One other way to know if you're over EQing, if your mix seems to have a lot of lows and a lot of highs and not a lot of mids, so it's got that smiley curve that you see on people's home theater systems, that's not good. Mid-range is good. Now, mid-range is tricky. Muddiness comes from that lower mid-range, but if you're so scared of it being muddy that everything has tons of highs and tons of lows, you done gone too far. That's what we say here in the U.S. I don't know how you say it in Scotland. You done gone too far. That was horrible. I'm sorry. P. Delano says, for vocal recording, what are those U-shaped panels sold for behind the mic? Isn't the cardioid pattern handling reflections from the back of the mic? Really good question. So he's talking about those reflection filters that you see. SE Electronics makes one, and then there's several others that make them too. So yeah, the concept is, so if I'm using a directional microphone, so this mic in front of me, it's directional, right? It's pointing at my mouth, which means the back of it is pointing over there at my speaker, which means that's the point that it's picking up the least amount of sound, right? So you would think, why would I need to block things off behind it if it's already blocking that by the nature of the polar pattern itself? It's a good question, and some people would say you don't. You need to put stuff behind you that's blocking the reflections off this back wall from getting into the microphone. The real answer is it's not blocking the reflections from getting into the mic, in my opinion, as much as it's blocking the sound of my voice from really getting out into the room. So it's stopping my voice from going and then bouncing all around the room and then coming back into the microphone. Now, does it do a fabulous job? I've never owned one, but my guess is it does kind of okay. It's not massive enough to do huge amounts of work, but I bet it can in this room here. So you can probably hear just a little bit, even with the gate on my vocal. This room's pretty live. Like it's not a dead room. So when I'm doing vocals, I do it in the other room, and I have my gobos around the microphone. So it's a nice little tight area where it sounds nice and just nothing, right? It doesn't sound like a room. So I imagine in a properly treated room that's maybe a little bit live, maybe that SC reflection filter helps a little bit, but it's not the same as like proper gobos and booths and things like that. But not to say it's not a good product. I know plenty of people who own them and use them. Another thing it might be good for is bleed. So if you have 2 musicians in the room and one is singing and the other's playing guitar, that might help block some of the guitar from getting into that microphone. That's a whole different thing, and that might be part of the thing as well. Good question. Sorry, I've not used one. I probably should get one and use it. I just don't have much interest in, like, I'm going to sing into the mic. Ha-na-na-na-na. Now I'm going to put the reflection filter up. Ha-na-na-na-na. Now let's listen. Ha-na-na-na-na. Ha-na-na-na-na. Oh, they sound almost exactly the same. Those types of things don't excite me versus, hey, I'm going to sing this song and it's going to sound like Queen. Well, whatever. Tim Scott says, do you have much experience using screen sharing to control the DAW on a collaborator's screen? If so, what screen sharing tool do you use? I don't have any way to control someone else's DAW. I mean, I had a GoToMeeting account for years for the webinars that I would do. So I would use that to like fix my mom's computer because she's in Mississippi and I'm in Tennessee occasionally. But no, never for controlling someone else's DAW. What I do have experience with is using the share screen feature on the Mac so that I can use my laptop to control my studio computer from the other room. So when I've got a session on acoustic guitar or vocals, instead of doing it in here where I don't think it's the best sound for vocals because it's a lot more live, I'll go back in there, have my nice little cozy cave set up, and then I'll just have my laptop mirroring my screen in here so I can do everything from there. And that works nicely. And then I come out here and check things, or it's a little annoying setting levels because if it's too loud, I have to get up and come in here and adjust the preamp, but I pretty much know where to set them now. So I almost never have to do that. But that's the only screen sharing that I do. As far as collaborating online over the internet, I'm sure that's the way things are going, but I've not done it and seen much need for it. I like to be in the same zip code as the person I'm working with if possible. Hey Joe, this is Mark Allen asking, how do you feel about emulating, recording, and mixing through a console with emulation plugins? So how do I feel about console emulation plugins? Is that what you're asking? I don't have a problem with them. You hear many people talk about, oh, I love the sound of those old Neve boards or that old SSL console. And a lot of what they're saying in those situations is the preamps. So, if you record everything through a cheap preamp on a cheap audio interface and then expect it to just become amazing going through an SSL channel strip, you might be fooling yourself a little bit. Nice preamps on the front end going into stock plugins sounds way better than the other way around, if that makes sense. So people probably think I'm anti-gear. I'm actually not. I'm all for having nice stuff on the front end. It's just I just don't see a need as much for the fancy plugins on the back end. If you do the front end part right, I mean, Adele's first big record, they were talking about how some of the vocals they EQ'd with the stock EQ in Pro Tools. Does that mean the stock EQ in Pro Tools is that amazing? No, it really just means Adele's voice is that amazing, and the microphone and preamp choices they made were amazing, and then it just didn't require any extra heavy lifting to make it sound amazing. So no, I don't have anything against them. I use the console feature in Studio One, just the one that comes with it, that it tends to just make things feel a little thicker, that console shaper thing. But I've not used many more. Graham Cochran is a good person to ask. He uses those things a lot. I've just never used them, and currently just don't really have any desire to dive into that because, again, I would rather just make music than spend a lot of time comparing plugins. That's just my personality. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just the way I tend to roll. Do we got more questions when I scroll back down? I love it. Keith said, I like your approach to, speaking of plugins, I like your approach to using stock plugins. Do you ever wish you still had them in certain situations, or do you get close enough or better since you know the stock plugins well? I don't know if it's as much as knowing the plugins well as it is knowing what sound I'm trying to make happen. That's a big difference. So it's not that I am such a Jedi at using PreSonus's stock plugins that I can make them do things that no one else can do. No, it's just that I know what I want my vocal to sound like, and I will use whatever tool you lay in front of me to get that sound. Some tools might make it easier, so maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot, and if I had SSL channel strips again, I would get to that sound much faster. But since I know what sound I want to hear, the tool becomes negligible because it's not going to create new sound that I've never heard before. It's a girl singing into a microphone. So I know there's a certain sound I want it to sound like. I'm going to make it sound like that, whether I use stock plugins or fancy plugins. It's probably going to come out sounding pretty close to my ear because my ear is what I'm using to make decisions. And I'm actually going for a sound. And once I hear that sound, I know I've arrived. I think that's different than people saying, pulling up plugins and just moving things around to then hope that some cool sound happens. That's fine if that's the way you work. It seems like that would make for a frustrating waste of time. But if that's your thing, go for it. But for me, I at this point, I know what sound I want, and then I want to I want to then just make that happen. So the tool becomes fairly irrelevant because I'm going to get the sound I want anyway. Gary tells me my Scottish accent was bad. It was. I can do better. I will do better another day. Musicality. Am I allowed to use the songs I've mixed in dueling mixes for a demo reel? Absolutely. That's part of what we talk about. We want you to use them. Just make sure you're crediting the musicians, because the musicians are the ones we're trying. The reason they let us use their songs is because they knew folks like you would mix it and put it on the internet and would give them exposure to people they may otherwise not reach. So make sure you use the artist's name and ideally link back to their website. Put in the work to make it worth their while, because they essentially gave you this song, right? Okay. Gary, I see your question about sweeping EQ. I just don't quite understand it. So ask it again, please. Daniel says, when I write, my vocal melody tends to follow the chords or lead work too closely. Do you have any advice on writing more interesting melodies? Listen to songs with interesting melodies for sure, which I know is kind of not a great, like a non-answer. For me, I have this thing where I won't move forward on a song until I've gotten to something that I don't think I've heard before. Okay, so like a chord progression that I've not heard or not done, if it feels new to me, then I go with it. So I usually start with chord progressions and then I work melodies around it. And for me, melodies is kind of the same thing. I'm trying to come up with this connection of notes that feels melodic and singable, but is also unique and something I haven't heard before, same sort of thing. So that's really all I have right now. I could probably, if I thought about it for a long time, I might come up with more, but that's kind of all I got. The question about measuring dynamic range. There are different tools for that. There's one called TT Dynamic Range Meter that I use. They have an offline version that'll just look in a folder and measure the files there and then spit out a text file. Don't ask me how to get that. You have to do your research. It's through, I remember I got it through donating to the Pleasurized Music Foundation. Then you get access to that for free. It's something like that, but you have to go figure that out for yourself. And there's more plugins out there like Dynameter from Ian Shepherd. I haven't checked it out yet, but I think it does that sort of thing as well. Do you use the high-pass filter or presence boost notches on the back of your 7B when recording vocals? No. Well, I've got it set to flat on the upper one, which I believe is a boost, because I believe the cut one is actually flat. I can't remember. But no, I just have it the same always. Is there a way to stop or lower proximity effect when using an SM58 or an AT2020? No, there's no way to change physics from happening, but you can just use a high-pass filter that will roll off excessive low end if you have to get close, and that's the only option. So a high-pass filter just rolls off frequencies below a certain cutoff frequency. How many of you clapped your hands after Joe did it to check reflections? That's funny. That's hilarious. Wow, y'all are really coming through with the questions now. Okay, Gary has a question about EQ. He says, you mentioned having 6 or 7 EQ moves, and that's probably too many. I noticed that I can find 4 or 5 frequencies in any given part that have whistles or other harsh sounds that I cut out. Now I'm wondering if I'm doing too much search and destroy. Great question. I've talked about this before, and there was a video where I talked specifically about this. I'll try to find it while I'm talking, but I probably won't be able to find it. So when you do, so the way a lot of people do EQ is you take the EQ, you boost it, and then you sweep it around until you find the quote offending frequency, and then you cut it down. The problem is, if you boost anything enough, any frequency will sound bad, right? So you can very quickly get into this range of like, well, I boosted 1K and it sounded bad, so I cut it. You could boost every single frequency in the spectrum and it'll probably sound bad. And then you're saying, well, no, I was sweeping and one stood out to me as louder than others. That still doesn't mean you should cut it unless it sounds bad. So for me, I almost never just go in and start hunting for frequencies to destroy. I listen and I say, okay, that vocal feels harsh. Harsh to me means somewhere in the 1K to 5K range, there is a frequency or two that is chopping my head off. So that's where I go, and I just look in there and I boost until I find that, and then I cut it, okay? That snare drum is ringing. Goo, goo, goo. I don't like that much ring. I go and boost and find that frequency until when I find it, I cut it. The other is if it's a little too roomy of a sound, like they didn't have much treatment and there's a room resonance. Sometimes I'll hear that and then I'll go find it. So it always starts with hearing something I'm not sure I like and then going to find that frequency and then stopping and starting the process over again. It's not about me just getting all my EQs and boosting and sweeping until I find something that sounds bad, because anything will sound bad boosted like that. You have to know what you're looking for so you know when you find it. Sorry, my throat's dry today. Hey Joe, in Studio One, what's the difference between having an effects channel as opposed to just dragging and dropping an effect onto the track? Effects channels are for things like reverb. Most of the time, I don't want to put reverb on an individual track. I want a reverb bus that I then can send my snare drum and my lead guitar and my lead vocal to. It's one reverb, but I'm sending several different things to it in varying degrees of level. So maybe have a lot of snare drum, not much guitar, and a medium amount of vocal. You can do that by having it on a bus and then using sends to send it off to that. If you think about it in just an analog studio or live sound sort of way, that's the way you do it. I have this nice reverb unit, and I like reverb on my drums, so I go to the aux sends that are going out to that reverb unit, and I turn it up, and then that reverb unit is coming back on a bus or another channel in my DAW, and that's where I'm hearing the reverb. That's what an effects channel is, same as a reverb bus. You've heard people say that before. Okay, almost out of time, and my voice is almost done. Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments, and they're really interesting. Have you run into limitations with the music that you'd like to make? Have you run into limitations, musicianship, recording, and mixing with the music that you'd like to make? The limitations I run into generally revolve around like me playing guitar. Maybe there's a spot for a solo and I'm not a lead guitar player. I can play good rhythm with some riffs and things, and I can come up with a semi-decent solo if you let me sit down with it for an hour, because I can hear it in my head and then I can play it, and it takes me an hour to play it right. You know what I mean? A lot of that could be solved by practice. I just don't have much desire to be a lead guitar player. I want to be the guy singing and playing guitar. So ideally, I would hire someone to play those solos, because a really good guitar soloist, and there are so many in Nashville, would knock it out in about 8 seconds, and I could move on with my day. It'd be worth paying him $50, $100 to just knock out that solo. Sorry, getting a call from Nashville, Tennessee. So that's probably the biggest limitation. Others are, I'm a good keyboard player. I'm not a great one, and occasionally songs call for great keys, and I may just play them myself anyway, and that may suffer there. Those are the big ones, just where musicianship has limited me a little bit. Yeah, and if you work with like projects where the recording and the musicians just weren't super great, they weren't in time super well, or they just weren't super great musicians, then you're limited, right, in mixing of what you can do. And they may be thinking, we sent him tracks, now he should send us something that sounds amazing. And maybe you can't, because the tracks aren't amazing and there's no way to get from here to there that way. Last question, Mark says, is automation critical to a mix? Only if it needs it. If I can get him to do a mix without any automation and the mix works, then I'm good and I call it done. All right, that's all the time I have for today. Thanks so much for listening. Come back next week for episode 200.